Hi students, I wanted to record a video for you as promised in which I look through a few of the drafts of the practitioner information sessions and give you some feedback. So right now on the screen I have the assignment, and I just want to highlight a few things about the memorandum and reports part of it. So in the two-page memorandum, which is supposed to come first, you need to make sure you do the things that are here bullet pointed. Summarize the practitioner's content, quote from their presentations, as well as quoting from 3 research sources, analyzing and drawing conclusions from the content, and referring to all of the above in light of the STC competencies, of which there are 9. And then we have the reports. You need 2 of them, and they each need to be 1 page long. The presentation reports are discussed here. And they need to be addressed to a supervisor, somebody who could not attend. Okay, so without further ado, I want to show you 3 examples from your colleagues in class. And I just want to say that all of them are very good. So I actually have to click over and start the recording again. It has nicely chunked text, as you can see. She starts off by saying this memo is about the discussion of what professional and technical writers do. I caution you guys against referring directly to our class assignments. I want you to get in a habit of pretending that you're writing for a situation that is not necessarily in the university context. So instead of saying we were given 3 resources in which individuals speak about their experiences, instead you could say this memorandum addresses presentations by 2 practitioners, comma, in this case, Laura Perlicek and Tom Johnson. You can say Laura Perlicek from Sandia National Labs and Tom Johnson from the I'd Rather Be Writing blog and Amazon. Okay, so that's just a different way of framing this in the opening summary section. Now, again, as I just said in the first part of this, there are several things you need to do in the analytical memo. You want to give a forecast of all of those at the outset in the summary section. So if you're going to talk about research sources, you're going to talk about the 2 practitioners, you're going to talk about the STC competencies, you want to give a forecast of that if you can. So in this next section, we see that she analyzes a little bit about Laura and Tom in this paragraph, talks about Perlicek, and refers to, has a direct quote in there, talks about Tom Johnson here, quotes from Perlicek again, and then we see here a quote from a scholarly source. This is an article, Act Well Thy Part, Technical Writer and Engineer. Now, you all need to get in a really great habit of, if you introduce something with a prepositional phrase, like in the article, Act Well Thy Part, you need to end that phrase with a comma, and then after the comma, give an active subject like the writer, or give the writer's name or something. You can't use the term it. So this happens all the time. I'm not focusing on one student who's the only one doing this, but a lot of students use a prepositional phrase and then use an it instead of exactly and explicitly naming the author by last name and saying, you know, Johnson writes, or whoever the author of this is, Amare, I guess. So it would be in the article, blah, 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 comma, Amare explains that, da, 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 da. So that would be much more accurate. Okay, so we have an extra space here. We have another secondary source here, and that's great, and a 3rd secondary source down here. Now, articles need to be in quotation marks, so be sure that in your attributive tags, which is great that they are used here, that those articles get put in quotation marks. So in conclusion, says this writer here, we have a conclusion section. This writer tries to bring Johnson and Perlicek together here. So this is structured well. I like the way this looks. It's very solid. It tries to do almost everything that was required. The one thing I don't see explicitly is any mention of the STC competencies and how the information presented by these 2 technical writers dovetails with what the STC is wanting technical and professional writers to be competent in. That is something that, to get a really excellent score on this, you need to drive home at the end. So I'm going to quickly scroll through the reports here, and then I'm going to move on to another student's example here. So we have 2 reports, but they're kind of combined into one report. You want these to be 2 autonomous reports, one on one of the Sandia Tech writers and one on Johnson. We see this student kind of combining them into a single 2-page report. So they need to be separate 1-pagers. And I'm just going to say one thing about this is this student uses too many bullet points. So this kind of report can use some bullet points, some numbered lists maybe if appropriate, but it should be largely chunked text with headings. Okay, so I'm going to stop talking about this one and move on to the next one. Okay, so here's another student example. This one is really strong as well. The last one was very strong in a lot of ways. So this one I just want to note a few stylistic things. In this format, there's no reason to have these little indentations at the beginning of these sections. They should all be justified left. Also, we see some paragraphs that are really quite long. I would encourage this writer to break these up into shorter chunks. Now, to go to the substance of this, we see the introduction says, this memo introduces and discusses in analysis the responsibilities, considerations, collaboration, and processes and production of technical and professional writers and their projects. For this assignment, I listened to the interviews from Tom Johnson and Antonia Cardella. I would advise this writer to break up that very dense first sentence and also to explain quickly who Tom Johnson and Antonia Cardella are. Next, we have the summary. This writer sort of pans out and says, technical writers come from various educational backgrounds, and these backgrounds contribute to their experience in their field in various ways. So that's good. That's a panning out. And then when we get into the analysis, this writer zooms back in. So that's good. These practitioners demonstrate two sides of the technical writing spectrum. Then this writer jumps into a secondary source, which is great. I want to zoom down to, oh, it's not here. So this person doesn't have a references page, which is not required. You do not have to have a references page, but some of the students who've turned these in do have them. And sometimes it's interesting for me to check because it helps me determine whether you're citing correctly. If this is the name of an article, this should be in quotation marks. If it's the name of a book, it should be italicized or underlined. So I want you all to check your APA citation style for parenthetical citations and make sure you're following it correctly. But I do want to say that I really appreciate that this writer is trying to incorporate smoothly secondary sources. That is required. Okay, so this writer is using some secondary sources to shore up some of the points that Tom Johnson is making. And then we move on to this next paragraph, which includes two more secondary citations, Patricia Durfee and Carolyn Miller. This is correctly done. Italicize the name of a journal. Very good. The name of the article. So that's done in quotation marks. So that leads me to believe that this up here must be a book or something like that. Okay, you see how dense this paragraph is. It should definitely be chunked up into smaller, more easily consumable, smaller bites, I suppose you can say. One thing that I do not see here again is the reference to the STC competencies I mentioned a few minutes ago, why it's important to do that. You're trying to not sort of just speak about Cardella and Johnson, in this case, in a vacuum. You're attempting to connect them to broader conversations in this field. That is done through the secondary research sources, and then it's done by referring to the 9 competencies that the STC hopes practitioners are conversant in. Okay, so we're going to move into the report. So here's one report, speaker biography, background, genre, audience, and learning points. I love that. What are the takeaways? Then the next one, report, speaker biography, overview, details and highlights, and learning points. These are really nicely done, very clean. So I've shown you in this video 2 examples from 2 students. They've both used page space well. I've seen a few examples where there's a huge white space in the right margin. You want to just have a really simple memo format here and report format, and don't get too creative with your white space. And I'm going to conclude this video because I don't want it to go on too long, but I think I've shined a light here on some of the things that work well in these 2 examples and some areas that could still be improved. But I would implore you to go back and look at the assignment one more time just to make sure that you're doing everything that the report requires of you, both of them, and that the memorandum requires of you. And I haven't shown here the notes that are also required. So make sure that the last part of the PDF is the notes that you took on your secondary scholarly research and during the podcast and the video presentation that you watched. So everybody stay healthy and thank you for listening.